Welcome to the Murfreesboro City Council meeting, March 3rd, 2016. Councilmember Ron Washington has our prayer and our pledge.
Before I get started, please keep Councilmember Amanda Scales Harris in your thoughts and prayers. She's progressing pretty well. I pretty much talk to her once or twice a week. She's in good spirits and glad to hear from her. She's watching tonight and she's keeping up, and she gets on me every once in a while about a few things, so that's not unusual. But keep in your prayers and thoughts, and hopefully she'll be back soon. All right, citizens, join and people here, join me for a moment of silence. Amen.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we don't have any ceremonial items tonight. We will have a ceremonial item next week.
Maybe the week after.
Week after, okay. All right. You have the February 25th, 2016 regular meeting minutes in front of you.
You need a motion. Move to accept the meeting minutes of the February 25th meeting.
Second. Motion second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Mr. Shacklett?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Moving to third readings and consider for passage on third and final reading ordinance 16OZ01 to rezone an area located along Gresham Lane to residential multifamily 16 RM16 district.
Move for passage.
Second.
Motion second. Ms. Wright?
Mr. Shacklett?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Consider for passage on third and final reading ordinance 16OZ02 to rezone an area located along Dill Lane to residential multifamily 12 RM12 district.
Move for passage.
Second. Motion is second. Ms. Wright?
Mr. Shacklett?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Consider for passage on third and final reading ordinance 16OZ03 to rezone an area located along Franklin Road to commercial fringe CF district.
So moved.
Second. Motion is second. Ms. Wright?
Mr. Shacklett?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. We'll move into new business. We'll conduct a public hearing and consider for approval a certificate of compliance for Sanjay Kumar A. Patel at Murfreesboro City Limits Liquors and Wine, 5353 Northwest Broad Street.
Mayor, this is a existing location but a new owner. This would require a public hearing before your consideration, and he has met our requirements. Once he gains approval, if he does through you tonight, he can move on to application with the state of Tennessee ABC.
Okay. We're going to have we'll have several public hearings tonight. I want to go ahead and give you our public hearing rules. If you'll make sure you come to the podium, state your name and address. If you'll keep all your comments addressed to the City Council. If you have any questions, we'll get those answered at the end of the public hearing. If you're representing a group, we ask that you'll speak for 5 minutes. If you're representing just yourself, it's 3 minutes. With that, we'll open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, please come to the podium. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and we'll consider for approval this certificate of compliance.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright?
Mr. Shacklett?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. We'll consider approval for a renewal certificate of compliance for Prajesh N. Patel and Gautam Patel at CNG Wine and Spirits at 2750 South Rutherford Boulevard.
This application is for an existing location. The State of Tennessee Alcoholic Beverage Commission requires every 2 years they renew their certificate of compliance. The applicants have met our requirements for us to approve the certificate of compliance, and we do recommend that.
All right. Do we have a motion for this approval of this certificate of compliance?
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright?
Mr. Shacklet?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Pursuant to Resolution 16R-PH04, adopted by the City Council on February 11, 2016, will conduct a public hearing to consider amending approximately 25.6 acres in the Planned Residential Development PRD District located along Florence Road in the Cedar Retreat PRD. Donald Henley Construction applicant. Notice of said public hearing was published in the February 15, 2016 issue of a local newspaper. Mr. Blumley.
Good evening, Mayor McFarland and members of the City Council. Our first public hearing tonight is for 25.6 acres located along the west side of Florence Road. The property was approved in 2006 as the Cedar Retreat PRD, Planned Residential District. The Cedar Retreat development never materialized, and the zoning has been in place for some 10 years now, and development has never moved forward. To give you an idea of the location of the subject property, I have the map zoomed out a little bit so you can see the location of the subject property. It's located just to the north of the Thistle Downs subdivision, which is just north of where Florence Road crosses I-24. The majority of the uses in the area are single-family residential in nature. To the north is the Youngstown subdivision, which is located in the unincorporated county. To the east, across Florence Road, is the Adams Run subdivision, which is zoned RS-12. To the south of the subject property, as I mentioned, is the Thistle Downs subdivision, which is zoned RS-10, RZ, and PUD, with a variety of lot sizes within Thistle Downs. Further to the southeast of the subject property is the Adams Point subdivision, which is also zoned RZ, and there are some commercially zoned parcels further to the south, closer to I-24. The existing Cedar Retreat PRD, which was approved in 2006, had a total density of 123 dwelling units, 77 of which would be single-family detached, and 46 of which would be single-family attached. And you can see the existing plan on the overhead in front of you. Towards the front were the single-family attached units, and towards the rear were the single-family or detached units. The detached units would be on lots with widths of between 40 and 60 feet, and the homes in the detached area would begin at 1,400 square feet, and the homes in the attached area would begin at 1,200 square feet. The current applicant recently purchased the property, and he does not wish to proceed with the development plan that Mr. Hastings had approved in 2006. The proposed PRD is a pretty radical departure from what was approved in 2006. He is looking to actually decrease the density from 123 dwelling units to 57 dwelling units. And all the lots in the subject property would be single-family detached lots of a minimum of 12,000 square feet. Were it not for the fact that he is looking for a reduction in the setbacks, this would actually be able to fit under a RS-12 zoning classification and not even need the PRD. As I mentioned, the minimum home size in the existing PRD is 1,200 or 1,400 square feet, depending on the product. He's looking to increase that minimum home size to 1,900 square feet. The existing development also had had building materials of brick and vinyl, and this would be the proposed exterior building materials for the houses would be brick, stone, and cement board siding, with vinyl allowed only in the trim, soffit, dormers, and gables. The applicant is proposing 35-foot setbacks for all garages, so there would be adequate room on site for 4 vehicles to park outside of the garage for every lot. With that being said, the Planning Commission did conduct a public hearing on this matter on February 3rd and unanimously voted to recommend approval to the City Council. Mr. Rob Mulchin with SEC has a brief presentation, no PowerPoint, but a brief presentation on this request that he would like to bring up some of the points of the development. I'll be happy to answer any questions either before or after the public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Palmy. Mr. Mollishon.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Rob Mulchin, SEC. I'm here on behalf of Don Henley Construction in regards to the amendment to the Cedar Retreat PRD. Mr. Henley, as Matthew pointed out, is looking at radically decreasing the density on the previously approved PRD, actually going down by more than 50% in regards to the amount of units being on this property. Mr. Henley's kind of modeling this after Southern Meadows subdivision off of St. Andrews. So more or less that the decreased amount of setbacks back to 25 will allow the houses to be up closer to the street just as they are in Southern Meadows, because they will all be side entry garages that'll allow definitely more than 4 parking spaces. The 35-foot setback in regards to the garages is for those houses that are on corners that may have a side entry garage that's actually more or less on the front and the side of the house. So that's what the difference was there. As Matthew also spoke about, they were looking at a minimum of 12,000 square foot lots, and also the homes being 1,900 square feet or more or greater on that. Mr. Henley's also proposing purely masonry type products on all elevations. So there'll be front, sides, and rear. So there'll be brick, stone, or hardy board on that. And there will also be minimum 2-car garages, and also minimum 2 bedrooms per unit. We're also proposing along the entrance area an open space just similar to the one that was in the previous PRD, be a passive recreation area for the residents. So we're looking at almost 9% of the overall gross site of the property being some kind of open space. So if I will be available for any questions.
Okay. Seeing none, we'll now open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, please come to the podium. All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll consider for passage on first reading ordinance 16-OZ04 to amend an area in the Cedar Retreat PRD located along Florence Road.
Move for passage on
Second.
first reading.
Motion and a second. Ms. Wright?
Mr. Shacklet?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. All right. Pursuant to Resolution 16-RPH05 adopted by the City Council on February 11, 2016, we'll conduct a public hearing and consider rezoning approximately 11 acres along Manson Pike from single-family residential 15, RS 15 district to planned residential development PRD district, Maddington Park. David Alcorn, applicant, 2016-401. Notice of said public hearing was published in the February 15, 2016 issue of a local newspaper. Mr. Bromley.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. Our second public hearing tonight is for the Maddington Park PRD, which is proposed to be located along the south side of Manson Pike. I've got the zoomed out map of the subject property. As you can see, it is to the west of the intersection of Brinkley Road and Manson Pike, and just to the west of John Lee Lane as well. John Lee Lane, where the Oakton subdivision is located. The subject property was annexed into the city about a year ago. The former owner of the property wished to annex the property into the city. He didn't have any development plans for it, so it was brought into the city with an interim zoning classification of RS-15. Because it was zoned residential in the county, it automatically came in with that interim zoning classification of RS-15. Mr. Alcorn and his company have since purchased the property and are looking to have it rezoned from that interim zone of RS-15 to PRD, Planned Residential District. The particular development that he is looking to develop, instead of doing the single-family lots of 15,000 square feet, which is what the property is currently zoned for, he is looking to do an 88 dwelling unit townhome development on that 11 acres for a density of 8 dwelling units per acre. As I mentioned, the subject property is directly to the west of the Oakton subdivision. You can see that several residential streets and subdivisions just to the east and south of the subject property. That includes the Oakton, Princeton Oaks, and Blackman Meadows subdivisions, which are all zoned RS12, residential single-family with minimum lot sizes of 12,000 square feet. To the north of the subject property, along the north side of Manson Pike, are several residential tracts in the county, as well as the Blackman United Methodist Church and the Blackman Community Center. Directly to the west of the subject property is another church that is actually owned by Blackman United Methodist Church, but is occupied or leased by a different church. Further to the west of that church, adjacent to 840, is property, and I'll hover the cursor over, that's property that recently was annexed and zoned commercial highway and commercial fringe. I believe it just passed third and final reading maybe about a month or so ago. As I mentioned, the applicant proposes a new townhome development called Maddington Park, which would consist of 88 dwelling units, which would be sold under a horizontal property regime. All streets would be private. And it would be a two-story townhome style of construction, units ranging from 1,500 to 2,100 square feet. And there would be 84 guest parking spaces in addition to the driveway spaces that would be provided in front of each unit. The development will exceed our minimum parking requirements for multifamily residential uses. A few points that were brought up during both of the Planning Commission meetings. A compactor has been provided instead of individual carts for these units. The compactor will be along the western property line adjacent to the church property. There was also discussion about the building elevations, and in response to discussion at the January 20th work session, the applicant upgraded the elevations so that the rear elevations are not entirely vinyl. They will be a mixture of vinyl, brick, stone, and hardy board, and that those elevations will be broken up with the different materials so that it is not a long, uninterrupted expanse of the same material. Another concern that was brought up during the January 20th work session was the orientation of the buildings adjacent to Manson Pike. Those buildings were then rotated so that the front of those buildings will actually face Manson Pike. The property is in the area that was contemplated in the general development plan for the Blackman community, which was approved around the year 2000. And I've got a copy of the Blackman land use plan, future land use map on the screen in front of you. It's the area, if you can see, that is right here where my arrow is pointed to. It's in pink, which is recommended to be developed as office distribution. It defines office distribution as office and distribution flex space in a well-planned setting with permitted uses of office, showroom, distribution facilities, and ancillary retail. As a caveat, however, the plan stated that the designation of this property as office distribution largely hinged on accessibility to the Veterans Parkway interchange. The future land use map showed a planned arterial road running from Veterans Parkway to Manson Pike parallel to State Route 840. And you can, if you follow my cursor, that is this road right here. And you can see that office distribution actually took in some of what is now the Oakton subdivision. This arterial road was never constructed, and with the development of the single-family subdivision in this area, such a road improvement seems very unlikely. Without this roadway, it may be argued that the office distribution recommendation is no longer appropriate for the subject property. With respect to the proposed PRD at hand, it might also be argued that such a multifamily use would be an appropriate transition from the single-family residential zoning to the east to the commercial zoning to the west that was approved about a month ago. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing, and Mr. Rob Mulchin with SEC has a PowerPoint presentation that he would like to give to the council with more details on the development.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Rob Mulch of the SEC. I'm here tonight to represent Debbie Elkhorn and Elkhorn Properties with his request for a rezoning for PRD to create Mannington Park, a 88-unit townhome development. A little background where the site is, as Matthew alluded to, it is located just to the south of 840, located between Veterans Parkway interchange and the interchange between 840 and I-24. There's the site itself, 11 acres. South side of Manson Pike. As you see on the east and southeast corners, Oakton subdivision, the undeveloped portions of Blackman Meadows is to the southwest. The United Methodist Church branch is next door on the west, and then of course the unincorporated portions of the county to the north on the other side of Manson Pike. A couple slides here to show the existing homes in Oakton. This is one of the properties just immediately south of immediately south of Mannington Park plans. This is another one of the homes to the east of the development. Another one of the homes just to the east of Mannington Park. As Matthew alluded to, the subdivisions around it are RS-12. The site came in as RS-15, requesting to go to PRD. The plan itself, this is Mannington Park, 88 two-story townhomes. And the main entrance, there will be one entrance off of Mannington Pike. To the right, to the left as you're coming in will be the main amenity feature, which will be the stormwater management area. And we'll be putting in a path or trail system around that for walking and exercising, recreation. There'll also be a gazebo or a pavilion there for relaxation and or a gathering space for the community or HOA events. There will be also on the east and south boundaries, we'll be incorporating a Class C buffer for screening between ourselves, between Oakton and Blackman Meadows. As I alluded to, 88 two-story townhomes on 11 acres, so about 8 units to the acre. Over 10% of the site will be open space, which will be amenities and landscaping. The units will range from size 1,500 to 2,100 square feet. All units will have at least 2 bedrooms. All units will be sold under the horizontal property regime. That means that this HOA will be maintaining the roadways, the sidewalks, any landscaping, the exterior facades of the buildings. The only thing that the ownership will be, the person who's buying into one of these townhomes, the only thing they'll be owning will be the space inside the 4 walls. So there'll be very little maintenance in regards to the home ownership. Setbacks, we're incorporating a 25-foot front setback from the back of sidewalks that will allow for a single car parking between the garage and the sidewalks. On the rear, we've got 2 different kinds. On the rear, it's both 20 foot between our buildings themselves and also the adjacent property lines. On the side, we're incorporating a 10-foot side setback between each of the units within the development, with 20 feet between the adjacent property lines. Each of the townhomes will provide a minimum 2 parking spaces. There'll be 1 inside the garage and 1 in the driveway. The end units of these townhomes will provide an actual 2 spaces outside besides the 1 space in the garage. So you're talking 3 spaces for the end units. Garages, like I said earlier, will be 25 feet behind the sidewalk. Garages will also be restricted via the restrictive covenants to be maintained for vehicle use only, no storage. The streets will be private and maintained by the HOA. Sidewalks will be on both sides of the street throughout the development. That will allow for a good walking system within the development, recreational system as part of the amenity package. All front and side yards will be sodded. Solid waste service will be through a private hauler and will be in a trash compactor located on the west side of the property adjacent to the church, away from the church. And all utilities will be underground. I want to take a look really quick at the elevations in regards to the buildings themselves. On the front will be a mixture of brick, stone, and cement board. As you can see, these elevations really kind of pop out. The garages will also be a neutral color in tone. The side elevations, these are side elevations that will be facing the streets within the development or the boundary around the development. The lower half of the first floor will be a brick or stone or hardy type boards on the lower portion. The upper portion will be either a hardy or vinyl siding on the second story and the gables. On the side elevations, these are elevations that will be facing each of the units within the development. It will be solely a siding and vinyl siding type product. This is a rear elevation. These will be rear elevations where we have a few of the units that actually face each other back to back. There'll be a purely vinyl sided product as well. This is what Matthew was talking about in regards to some of the stuff that came out of the Planning Commission workshop and Planning Commission meeting. The rear elevations that face the streets or the adjacent properties, Oakton and Blackman Meadows, they will be a mixture of brick, stone, hardy board. There'll also be a mixture of where the materials are located on those sides. So you can see on the color rendering there, you'll have some lower elevations that'll have some brick and stone with siding and vinyl siding, with the hardy board above it. And vinyl will only be used in the trim and soffit areas on the back sides of these units. You can also see in the plan view that the actual units within the townhome itself are actually articulated back and forth 2 feet to create some articulation between the units, which will then break up the elevation so it's not one long continuous elevation, and giving some characteristic flow to the building itself. Amenities, as I stated earlier, over 10% of the site will be some kind of open space or amenity, part of the amenities package. The main feature will be the recreational trail around the stormwater management area. There will also be a pavilion or gazebo located at the corner for gathering spaces and relaxation. And as I also stated before, there will be sidewalks on both sides of the street throughout the community, which will create a good walking and or jogging trail around the development. Landscaping, as I spoke to earlier, we'll be incorporating, as you can see in the red areas on the plan there, the Class C buffer will be utilized to screen this development between us and Oakton and Blackman Meadows. The plan is to leave any existing fence row materials, trees, shrubs, and such in there, and then utilize this Class C buffer to enhance the screening between the two developments. And then within that buffer will be primarily evergreen tree species that will grow, 20, 25 feet or more in height, and then using magnolias or cedars or arborvitae to provide that screening. Along the front side, along Manson Pike, as Matthew alluded to, we did originally have the backs of these units backing up to, and during the workshop we incorporated changing those over to be fronting onto Manson Pike to create more of a streetscape appearance between the development and Manson Pike. There'll also be a small front yard, as you can see that green strip between the right-of-way and the development, a small green area out there to create more of a front yard appearance as well. They'll have some landscaping, trees and shrubs and other such. We'll also have at the main entrance the masonry entrance sign with landscaping at the base of that as well. With that, I'll be open to any questions now or after the public hearing.
Rob, will there be little privacy fences at the back of the patios separating the patios? We see that quite often in units like this.
We don't know at this time. We'll definitely think about it as being a consideration as well. I think the Class C buffer is going to provide a pretty good visual barrier. It'll provide some sound barrier as well in regards once that really gets fully developed and it gets fully filled out. That'll be a good buffer. And that incorporated along with the existing materials along the fence row will create a good visual barrier between the two developments.
But I'm talking about where the house is side by side in the back, and each one has a patio, and they're...
Yeah, we'll definitely take that into consideration, look at that. I mean, I would have to suspect that, most developments that do townhomes like this have that just from that privacy side of things. And it may become something more of like a trellis-y type of material. It's just one of those things we'll have to, when we get into the design phase, look at it.
I can't, what is the setback between Oakton, the property line, and the building? What's the distance?
Currently, right now, it's a 20-foot setback is what the minimum setback is between the developments and any of our structures on our development right now.
20 feet?
Yeah, 20 feet.
And then within that 20 feet is your
20 feet will be the minimum Class C buffer calls for 12 feet of landscaping plan between the adjacent property line and 12 feet out from there. So it's a 12-foot buffer, and within that buffer, it's a double staggered row of evergreen trees. So you have your arborvitaes, your cedars, your magnolias, really dense, the urban development. Sorry, Urban Environmental Department really stresses utilizing very heavy, very thick evergreen tree materials to utilize in that Class C buffer because it is such a change in character between the two.
It's 12 feet?
Yeah, 12 feet, and what you have is a evergreen tree staggered, offset, and it just keeps rolling down the side of it. And then you also have incorporated at the lower side of that too. You also have minimum at planting time 4-foot tall evergreen shrubs to kind of help fill in the gaps as those trees mature.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mulshaw.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, please come to the podium.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. My name is Virginia Griffith, and I live at 1620 John Lee Lane. I'm here to represent Oakton, Princeton Oaks, and Blackman Meadows. The residents of Oakton, Princeton Oaks, and Blackman Meadows feel that the current plans for Maddington Park will negatively impact our community. The developers stated within their concept plan for the development that Maddington Park has been designed with ample open space and landscaping to provide not only an aesthetically pleasing experience, but to aid in mitigating impacts to the surrounding areas. We feel that the current plans have not met this task and ask that the following amendments be approved. The first is that the setback from the property line be extended to 30 feet. We feel that to provide further distance from the back of Oakton properties and Blackman Meadow properties, we request that the setbacks for the rear and side of the units be increased from 20 to 30 feet. And although 10 feet may not sound like a great distance, we feel it will provide a greater space between our single-family residential properties and the multifamily properties of Maddington Park. We believe that both traditional fencing and live fencing should be placed along the entire perimeter of Maddington Park. So while the proposed Type C landscape buffer may help, we feel that a vinyl fencing blocking people from walking in between the two properties is very important. We also find a very strong emphasis on this Type C landscape buffer, ensuring that Leyland cypress or pine or the appropriate type of evergreen trees are planted to provide sufficient coverage between the two developments. We also want a strong emphasis that the existing tree line be kept entirely intact. So this existing tree line is abundant and in the blooming months provides good coverage at this time. So we feel that as long as the existing tree line plus the Type C buffer is implemented, it'll provide a good barrier between the two developments. An additional ask is that the street-facing side and the rear elevations of the buildings be brick or stone for both stories. Currently, the plan is to have the street-facing elevations be brick or stone on the first floor, and the rear elevations will be constructed of a mixture of material options. We feel that with these buffers, the first story, brick or stone, will be blocked, and all that you'll see from our properties is the vinyl siding, and that's why we ask for both stories to be stone or brick. Another key feature that we find missing in this plan is that there are no additional turnarounds or cul-de-sacs. We're asking that this be added to ensure that school bus pickup and drop-off does not occur on Manson Pike. We've been told that there is a proposed plan that Manson Pike will be expanded to 5 lanes. We find it alarming that we would have children pick up and drop off from a school bus on a 5-lane road. Currently, this development has nowhere for a bus to turn around, so we would really like to see that addressed. Our last ask is that the open commons area exist in Phase 4 and the 18 remaining units be pushed to the front of Maddington Park in Phase 1. So currently, you've heard the retention pond with the walking path referenced. We would like to have that move back to Phase 4 that will bump up directly to the back of the Oakton properties, and the remaining units be pushed to the front of Maddington Park. So our next steps that we're asking is that we have a petition signed from our residents, has 60+ signatures that are representing over 80 residents. Over 4 homes have already been placed on the market in our subdivision due to this application and the fear that it's caused in our neighborhood. So we respectfully implore the council to approve our requested amendment so that the Maddington Park development does not negatively impact our neighborhood further. We feel that our requests are not out of line and that the current plan should be easily updated by skilled developers such as Alcorn Properties. I have my neighbors here to represent if everyone would like to stand up to show our presence here tonight. We appreciate that all that you do to represent our city, and we have faith that the needs of our neighborhood will be honored by your decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
You want to defer this and let them work on it?
He's the one who's talking.
No. See, they're complaining about
Anybody else?
Anyone else wishing to speak for or against?
Good evening. My name is Melissa Stevens, and I'm a resident of Oakton as well. I'm also a local business owner and a former member of the Rutherford County Chamber of Commerce. I was a diplomat there. And I wanted to speak just a minute about what I consider to be overdevelopment of our area. As a business owner, I am not inherently against development. Growth is good. It brings jobs and opportunities to our area and the citizens who live here. But it needs to be well thought out, planned, and responsible. And unfortunately, I don't think that's what's happening here. The Planning Commission and the council are approving development left and right with no regard for the quality of life of the individuals and families that already call Murfreesboro home. Our roads are not ready. Our schools are not ready. And every stitch of grass has something being built on it. I attended the public hearing with the Planning Commission for this development, and I sat in awe that the developer was given so much opportunity to address any concerns that you had, but when it came time for us to address our concerns, they were dismissed. Some of the commission members even joked and laughed about our concerns about our property values, saying that their property values weren't going down, so that was a silly concern of ours. I dare say that they don't have condos in the back of their properties. I would like to respectfully ask that the commission and the council take a step back and be thoughtful and responsible about the planning for our community. We have so many residents here who love this town. I'm one of them. I've lived here for a long time, and I don't want to have to leave this community to find a home where I'm not overcrowded and smushed up against other people. Thank you very much.
Anyone else wishing to speak for or against? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. And we'll consider for passage on first reading ordinance 16OZ05 to rezone an area along Manson Pike to plan a residential development PRD district.
Let me ask one question.
Mr. Washington.
One question. Did you or your parties make an attempt to meet with these people, was there any kind of community, neighborhood meeting or something like that accomplished? Did you all do that?
No, we did not do a neighborhood meeting. We weren't requested by staff to have a meeting in regards to the development. I just spoke with our client in regards to some of the suggestions from the neighbors in Oakton in regards to some of those things. If I could address those right now, if you wouldn't mind, I've got some concessions we'd like to make with them in regards to some of their requests.
Yeah, go ahead, because the bus deal about how to circulate inside of development, that makes sense to me.
Right. I mean, school bus routing will be taken care of by the county and or city, in regards to how that routing is done. The development itself does provide a loop, so there's really no necessary need for a cul-de-sac, because when you come into development, it is more or less a donut in regards to the main street structure that's in there. So once the bus comes in, it could go all the way around the inside of the development and come back out without having to make a turnaround in any form or fashion in regards to development.
Gotcha.
If I can address the concerns in question, I mean, the concessions that the residents of Oakton have asked for tonight. Number one, they talked about wanting to go to a 30-foot setback versus the 20-foot setback we're currently proposing. My applicant, Mr. Alcorn, and his development group are willing to make that concession and move to 30-foot setbacks in regards to the buildings adjacent to your properties. The fencing along the property lines in regards to doubling that up with our proposed landscaping, we are willing to make a concession and take that Class C buffer and increase that to a larger landscape buffer. Vinyl fence along that entire property line besides the buffer it's just we can definitely do an increased landscape buffer to enhance that further on that side of things. So we're open to making that concession on that side, make it a little deeper, a little thicker in regards to the materials that are going into that. And the existing tree line, that is our intent. I mean, when it gets down to actually doing site plan design and grading and stuff like that, utilities and such that will go on in regards to connectivity for sewer and water and stuff like that that may not come through the front of the development. Those kinds of things, there might be a little pocket or two here, but the intent is from our side right now, before we get into construction document phase, is to leave the existing trees and stuff there and then put the landscape on the other side of it so that that existing material is already fully grown to what it is now, with the younger stuff growing up over time on that side. Brick and stone on both on the rear elevations that are facing your developments, regards to doing brick or stone all the way up on both elevations. My client is willing to go ahead and forego using vinyl siding on any of the elevations that face your homes and go with a cement board siding on those locations that we had talked about in regards to the first story being brick, stone, or some kind of cement board, going with the second story, getting rid of the vinyl siding on that and going to a hardy board material on that. We just don't feel like we want to do a brick all the way up, because then that makes it feel more like something of a true apartment style kind of look. So we want to make it some articulation to the levels of the architecture on that. But I think going to a vinyl siding would be a good compromise. I mean, going from the vinyl to a cement board is a good compromise in regards to that. In regards to the bus, I think we just talked about that with Mr. Washington. That's something that's to be solely set upon by the school board and the bus route makers in regards to how that goes. But the development does provide for a complete circular motion for buses once they do come in. There is no need for them to make a U-turn. So I do agree, but it's up to the school board and the bus routing folks as to where those bus stops are made. I have those kinds of concerns with my kids at my neighborhood. I've actually got to take my kids down to the corner instead of the end of my driveway. So, but I've tried that route, and it's hard to do making those concessions on that side. So from a bus standpoint, if they do have a stop inside the development, they will come in and be able to move freely out of the development. I haven't doing backup motions on that. The last question in regards to moving the units from the back to the front and moving the pond to the back, that we cannot do, and it's not because we don't want to choose to, just because it's a hydrologic situation in regards to that. The location of that pond in that corner currently resides at the lowest point in the development. And when we're talking about dealing with the stormwater management and state regulations, that's the lowest point. That's where we have to have everything pond up before where we hold that water before it's allowed to be discharged and go on the culverts underneath the roadway. So that's our lowest point in the property. It's not feasible to move that to the higher end of the property and be able to maintain the water from the lower end of the development, because we have to hold any and all water that lands on this property and contain it within our development before and hold it for a certain period of time so we don't increase rates of flow on the adjacent neighbors on the north side of Manson Pike. So that's one of those things we just can't do from a standpoint of hydrologic and engineering sides of things on that. So we were definitely open to those kinds of concessions. Like I said, moving the rear setbacks back to 30 feet from 20 feet. The fencing we're going to take out the fencing side of things and increase the buffer within that 30-foot. We'll add, instead of it being a Class C buffer, we'll go to a Class D buffer, which is definitely a lot more. It's more of a buffer that's utilized between any kind of development and an industrial side of things on that. So it's definitely a lot thicker than that. So we'll use a Class D size buffer on that. The existing tree line, like I said, we are going to preserve as much as we can in regards to that to help with that buffering. Brick and stone on both elevations. I think a good compromise, like I said, is to go ahead and do the hardy board or cement board paneling type of stuff instead of vinyl siding on that faces your properties. Again, the bus situation, we've got that kind of situated in regards to our loop we already got in the development. And then, again, the moving the units from the back to the front just as an engineering, we just can't do it from an engineering standpoint.
Rob, Mr. Shacklet takes wonderful notes, and he took the notes of what our people out here wanted, and you have addressed most of them. You really have. But what I want you to do, I want to defer this tonight for 2 weeks, and I want you to put all this in writing, and then I want you to meet with the neighbors and show them what you're going to do. Don't tell them what you're going to do. Show them what you're going to do.
Okay.
It won't be hard. You can do it. And the neighbors deserve that. And I apologize for not doing this at the Planning Commission. That's my fault. So
that's fine.
I think you have conceded pretty much everything they wanted done. And you did that in consultation with your developer, and I appreciate him doing that. But I really think you need to tie this down in writing. We don't need a new pattern book. We just need to tie this down and get with the neighbors, and you can do it in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever you want to do.
Okay. We'll get with staff and set up a time to have that meeting, and we'll be back hopefully within 2 weeks in regards to that. Mr. Alcorn is definitely in agreement with that, and sitting down with the folks and kind of making certain that what they're asking for is in writing.
You ready for a motion?
You just made one.
Mr. Mayor, I move for deferral for 3 weeks. What date would that be? And we've had the public hearing, so the meeting that you have with the neighbors will hash out all these problems.
Correct.
Are you confident you can get your work completed, and then a neighborhood meeting? I don't want to have a time
I
period
don't
set
either.
and then have a calendar.
Well, why don't we just leave that open, and then staff and you, sir, can come back after you've had that meeting? 'Cause
Yeah, we'll work with staff and setting up a date in
spring
which we
break's
come back.
coming up, and these people may be traveling, and you may be traveling, but I don't think holding this project up 30 days is going to make a big difference, but it's going to assure the neighbors of the uncertainty of what they have, and the biggest fear everybody has is uncertainty.
Correct.
I think as a whole, it's a good project. I really do. And the concessions you've made tonight are going to make it a better project. But we missed that communication link.
I agree.
Thank you.
We have a motion?
Second.
Motion and second. Ms. Wright, call the roll.
Mr. Shacklet?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye.
Thank you.
Pursuant to Resolution 16-RPH-07, adopted by the City Council on February 11, 2016, conduct a public hearing to consider rezoning approximately 2.3 acres at 3281 Siegel Road from single-family residential 15 RS15 district to planned commercial development PCD district, Academy at Siegel. Cornerstone Development applicant. Notice of said public hearing was published in the February 15, 2016 issue of a local newspaper.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This next public hearing is for you to consider a zoning change request which the Planning Commission is recommending you approve. It is to rezone property located along Siegel Road, and it's actually a portion of property located along Siegel Road from its current RS15 district, which is single-family residential district, to PCD, planned commercial district. This is a smaller portion of the larger portion, as you can see on the map that's before you. All the surrounding properties are zoned RS15 as well, which is single-family residential district. Directly to the north of this property is a single-family home, and just north of that is a church, which is located at the intersection of West Thompson Lane and Siegel Road. Across Siegel Road is the Siegel School Complex, and you can see Siegel High School identified on the map before you. The property to the south is the remainder of the property that is being sold. And to the west is property that is zoned RS15 and developed as city single-family subdivisions. The subject area is undeveloped, and the request is for you to zone it to PCD. As such, a book has been provided to you called the Academy at Siegel, which is the program book for this property. A planned development approach allows the applicants to make a specific application, which you can review and If you do approve it, this becomes the zoning for the property. The applicants wish to construct a daycare on the site, and Cornerstone Development are the applicants. They've constructed 2 other daycares in our community, which are good examples of daycare, both of which are located in the Gateway. One is Academy at the Gateway, which is located just off of Medical Center Parkway, and the other is located along Fortress Boulevard. They've identified this area as a good location for their type of business because it is located near the school complexes, and they believe that it'll be a good companion for those folks who wish to utilize daycare and may have children who are a little bit older and go to school there. I mentioned to you that this is a planned development program, and as such, they need to come up with a specific program for the property. You can see they've committed to a certain architectural style in the book, and any of the uses would be required to conform to those. The plan development process also asks for them to identify any of the uses that they think may be appropriate for this site, and you can see a list of uses in the program book. If you've read my staff comments, you can see that the uses are different because there's one use that's not in the program book that you have before you. The evening of the public hearing at Planning Commission, the Planning Commission did recommend approval, but with 2 changes. One is that mental health facility be taken out of the list of permitted uses, and the book you have takes that use out. You, of course, should review the list, and if you think that they're appropriate, you can approve it, or you can recommend that uses be taken out as well if you think there are some that aren't appropriate. The Planning Commission also had another condition, and that is that the privacy fence located along the northern side property line adjacent to that single-family home along the north be extended. Initially, they showed the 6-foot vinyl privacy fence only going along a portion of that property line. It now extends all the way along that property line. The Planning Commission had some concerns regarding the detention area shown in the plans, and you may share those concerns, but upon studying that will not be a wet pond. They were, of course, concerned with having very young children in an area where there would be a pond. Also, the fence being extended is another bonus because that neighbor to the north has a pool, and sometimes a pool can be alluring to young children, and the privacy fence will help shield that from their view so it's not something that they can see there. The evening of the public hearing, all Planning Commission members, there was 1 abstention, and all the remaining Planning Commission members did recommend approval of this book with those 2 changes that you have. I'm going to invite Matt Taylor to the lectern now to go through a presentation that they've prepared for you, going through the specifics of this program book. I welcome your questions you have either before or after the public hearing.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Good evening, Mayor McFarland, members of the council. I'm Matt Taylor of SCC here in town. I'm accompanied tonight by Mr. Bart Klein, the architect on the project, Mr. Harry Mingy, the applicant, as well as Mr. John Harney of the Parks Group here locally in Murfreesboro. We are here tonight to present to you our proposed academy at Siegel, a proposed daycare located along the western side of Siegel Road. The property itself is located directly across from Siegel High's northernmost entrance. It is a portion of the Bruce Hooper tract, where it's bounded on the north by the Hopper property, and past that is Northside Baptist Church. To the south is another existing residence and the remainder of the Bruce Hooper property itself. And then to the west is an open vacant tract also owned by Northside Baptist, and beyond that is Windsor Green subdivision. The site itself is just over 2.3 acres in size. We're proposing a 1-story building at approximately 16,000 square feet in size. We're providing over 20% green area, landscape buffers along the north, south, and western perimeter, and then we're screening our parking lot from the right-of-way of Siegel. We have specifically aligned our entry drive with the northernmost entrance of Siegel itself to allow for optimal traffic flow. In addition, we've tried to spread the parking around the site so we don't have a sea of parking in front, on the side, or in the rear. We have smaller lots scattered throughout. We do have 3 playgrounds, the largest of those at the rear of the building, the other 2 on the front corners, and each of those will be enclosed by a decorative aluminum fence. The trash enclosure is located at the rear of the building, away from the two nearest existing residences, and it will be screened with a masonry wall and further screened with landscaping. In addition to that, we do plan for a monument sign to be located at our entrance off of Siegel with materials that will match the building architecture and be reinforced with landscaping at its base. One of the more important things that we discussed with staff when we first started talking about this project was the fact that this was in a residential zone and it needed to have a residential character to the site itself as well as the architecture. And so we had tried to accomplish that on the site by breaking up the parking into smaller lots and screening that through landscaping. The building itself, we tried to make sure it had a lot of residential character. We're using residential windows, using pitched roof, shingles, and residential materials instead of more commercialized type materials. So I think you'll see as we go through these slides that it does obtain that, but it also makes sure to provide multiple building facade planes, multiple materials along each building elevation, and roof changes as we go along to provide a lot of articulation and a very nice and attractive architecture. The ones on the screen right now are the front and rear, be what faces Siegel, and then what would face the rear of our site. And then the sides. The one on the top would face to the south, while the one on the north, the bottom would face the north. All of our materials are brick, cement board siding, cedar board siding, architectural shingles, metal in the soffit areas, and as I mentioned earlier, residential windows. Landscape design. We are proposing those buffers around each of our sides and rears. There'll be a type B buffer along those. And then along the north, we're going to do a solid PVC fence all along the northern perimeter to help screen our neighbor there, and that was at her request. We're also going to have a very well landscape building, foundation plantings, help reinforce and complement the architecture. An example of the top fence we're planting along the northern perimeter. Our buffers will rely heavily on evergreen materials. While we're planning for a daycare use, as with any commercialized use or any other use period, one day this particular user may be gone, and so we've tried to plan for a future user down the road. We've tried to think out of low impact neighborhood services, uses that will complement the area instead of degrade it. And so you have a full list of uses inside of your book, but a few of those would involve a card shop, a plant shop, some weight loss services, possibly a barber shop in this area. Myself, as well as any other member of the team, will be happy to answer any questions now or after the public hearing as well.
All right, we'll open up the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, please come to the podium. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. I've got a quick question for staff. Are there any concerns with bringing a more commercial use into an area where there are no commercial uses?
We were concerned with a bulk zone or just allowing various types of commercial use. A daycare is more of it's a commercial use, but it's more of an institutional use. And with the schools and the church directly in this area, those are both institutional uses as well. So we saw it as a good use for the area. With planned developments, the zoning ordinance asks for a list of permitted uses to be identified. And this may, in the future, reduce the need to keep coming back to you for minor changes to the plan development. So if they could think through the types of things that might be good fits there, that's what we've asked them to do. I don't think this is a wholesale introducing commercial into this area because it's very restricted, but the daycare use seems to be very compatible with this specific surroundings.
My main concern, I agree, I think the daycare, although the traffic, the times that a daycare would be open, traffic on Siegel Road is pretty bad in those early hours and late hours. But I could support it, but I can't support it anything else than a daycare. I think that when you get it outside of the daycare and you start looking at farm labor and management services, art, photo studio gallery, barber and beauty shop, I mean, there's not going to be a 16,000 square foot barber and beauty shop, a book or card shop, a catering establishment. Then we start talking about food uses next to a residential neighborhood and people cooking food with grease traps and if there's fryers or things like that in there. So a health club, then you start talking about health club being open all hours of the night. Now most health clubs are open 24 hours.
The plan development does restrict the hours of operation,
Okay.
so that wouldn't be available.
I mean, I can understand the daycare use, but I don't.
Right.
I
Could
think-
you understand a church?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I
then
think-
there's also nursery school,
Yeah, I
park.
think those, yeah, I went through and I marked about 12 that I think.
Mr. Leming and Matt Taylor, I guess, can speak to that, but they're open to, if you're not
Okay.
comfortable with something, they're open to that. But we wanted to think through, plan big, and if we need to scale back, then that certainly can be a suggestion.
I don't know why my phone is going off here, but
It's kind of a catchy tune.
I know.
Name that tune.
And my watch made my phone go off.
If, I think you had mentioned there was several on the list that you had went through, Mayor.
Yes.
Which ones were those? And
I would think that anything that has to do with cooking food would be an issue, especially with that being next to neighborhoods.
okay.
A public building, I don't think you'd want to see when I say think a public building, I would think like the DMV moving in there, which would be tough. Farm labor and management services, barber and beauty shop, book or card shop, catering establishment, a health club, reducing and weight control service, or a post office. Those are the ones I just highlighted that I think could, and that's not to say that if something ever happened with the daycare that someone wanted to come back and say,
Sure.
we want to look for a use change, but I think this would give the neighbors some ease of what actually is going in there.
Okay. I don't think we are, I didn't hear anything on your list that we would object to being removed from the list.
Okay.
So those were pretty quick. So if I could get that list, I'll be happy to amend the pattern book for the second reading.
Okay, thank you.
Move for approval with mayor's suggestions.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright?
Mr. Shacklet?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. All right, we have now consider recommendations of the Planning Commission to schedule public hearings to consider annexation plan and services and annexation petition 16.5 acres along West Thompson Lane, General's Landing, zoning 16.5 acres along West Thompson Lane, PRD, simultaneous with annexation, and rezoning 16.5 acres from RS15 to PRD, General's Landing.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. The items, as you mentioned, were considered February 3rd Planning Commission meeting. Public hearing was conducted at that meeting. The annexation item was recommended for approval at that time. The zoning item was deferred until February the 17th, at which time the Planning Commission took action to recommend approval of that item under old business on the agenda. There was quite a bit of public input on the zoning portion especially, and in addition we are still waiting on some additional information from the applicant before the City Council public hearing. We feel confident that he can get that information to us before the public hearing, but we have asked for a public hearing date that is a little bit further out than typical. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
And Mayor, we would suggest May 5 as a public hearing date for these two.
Boy, are we that far out now?
It's our first of the month meeting, or first Thursday of the month, so most likely we will meet because of the public comment period.
Are you having a dialogue with the developer and the neighbors as we work through these issues?
Ms. Green may need to address that, or Mr. Whitaker. I know that the developer, yes, definitely.
We're still working on getting that book revised per your comments. We just reviewed it again today, and it's not quite there, so we haven't released that to any of the neighbors. We intend on sharing that with the neighbors, but we haven't yet, and that's why we needed more time, is because we wanted the design team to be able to get it in good shape, and the book isn't in good shape. Representative of the applicant is here if you have questions from him. And we think 2 months is enough time to get something that's good to be circulated.
Now, the developer made several concessions early on when he came back to the Planning Commission from the initial look-see by the planning staff, so that's a good start. We just need to keep the neighbors informed because they have some terrible drainage problems out there, and this is going to go a long way to solve those problems. It's not going to solve all their problems, but it's going to help a lot.
Right, sir. A few of those neighbors are here this evening.
I understand.
And they are, I think even if we didn't reach out to them, they would find us and make sure that we got the information to them.
I know one of them will.
Yeah.
2 of them, 3 of them.
3 of them. Yeah. And they're helping us circulate information to their...
Something you might want to look at, Ms. Green, is there are 2 parcels to the east of this that, not large parcels, but parcels that could be put into a development similar to this. And I don't know if you need to look at circulation into those or out of those or what. But if you would look at that, I think it's the Massey property and the, I can't think
The
of,
long, thin parcels that are directly
Yes, ma'am, that's it.
Yes, sir.
2 long, thin parcels that back up to this, to come to the side of this.
Sir.
And also, is there adequate right-of-way when my grandchildren build the Thompson Lane road?
We made them aware that we believe some right-of-way donation will be necessary on their part. And the project, which you looked at last year, Tuscany, just further down the road, they looked at the plan and saw that they needed to donate some right-of-way to us, and so they're looking at this as well. There are also some improvements on the road directly in front of this that they'll have to make turn lanes to get any turning traffic out of the through lanes.
Okay. Good job. Good job.
Ms. Green, I do want to say I appreciate you holding off about releasing information till you've got really good, solid information, though, because there's nothing worse than going to a neighborhood meeting and seeing 3 different plans and everybody's saying, well, I'm upset about this when it's no longer even what they're looking at. So I know in the past we've had a couple situations where I've gone to neighborhood meetings and everybody's got a drawing of what's going to take place, and it's not what's going to take place. So I admire you and appreciate you holding back until you get truly a solid package to present. So thank you.
April the what?
5th.
15th?
5th.
May.
May 5th. May 5th.
You ready for that? Move to set a public hearing May 5th.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Ray?
Mr. Shacklet?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Thank you, Ms. Green.
Thank you, sir.
Make him introduce himself.
We'll now consider recommendations of the Water and Sewer Director about revisions to policies, procedures, and general design guidelines, Section 1.3, regarding sewer availability to outside city customers in State of Tennessee law regarding annexation.
Mayor, members of the City Council, thank you for the opportunity tonight. What we're bringing before you is a Section 1.3 of the Murfreesboro Water and Sewer Department policies and procedures and general design guidelines. Excuse me, I'm trying to get this presentation up. So I've got a little pressure on me to get this presentation going. get that up.
Finish the presentation.
What came about on this? Thank you. Perfect. What created this change in policy? I'm calling it the game changer. The annexation law that was changed, I think, last year, and everyone can. I don't know the exact date, but in effect, that state law changed annexation policy or annexation allowances by municipalities, that a parcel must be either contiguous to the existing city limits or it must get annexation between the city limits and all adjacent properties between it and the city limits, if I've said that correctly. So what we've had to do is change our policy on outside city sewer customers. This is our policies right now. Let me go to that. Well, this is an example. Let me do an example first. You can see the city limits here, and then you can see the parcel in blue that has sewer on it. However, by new state law, that unless that tract was able to get some parcels between it and the city limits to also request annexation, it would be not annexable under the current state law. Our current policy doesn't disallow sewer service to outside the city customers. However, it sets, I think, an improper expectation that outside city sewer service is likely. With the new state law and the annexation requirements, we really are looking at changing that expectation to be more restrictive. So the proposed policy is a utility extension policy that says only properties that are within the Buchanan and Elam Road Interchange Sanitary Sewer Assessment District, as defined by City Code Section 33206, will be considered for outside the city sewer service, and only properties may be considered outside the city sewer customers where providing sewer services is deemed a higher benefit to the public than annexation affords. Example of that would be a park or a school. The impact of that, I tried to give a map here. I know it's kind of busy. The pink parcels are tracts that are not contiguous to the city limits that under current state law would not be annexable right now. In the overall Creek-Rockville area, there's about 36 parcels that make up about 400 acres. That's actually a lot less than I thought would be impacted. And ultimately, I think those parcels will be annexable because the city will ultimately come around them, and so the sewer, these are tracts that have sewer on them right now, but are outside the city limits and not annexable under current state law. But I think over time those 400 acres will ultimately be brought in. The area, the Buchanan-Elam area, the reason we allowed that to be considered for outside city sewer services, we have a current contract, or the city has a current contract with the Farah Brothers that's in effect for the next 9 years. So of those 26 parcels and 2,100 acres, I don't know how much of those will develop over the next 9 years, but I think we're contractually obligated to provide sewer even though those parcels can't be annexed. Now, after that 9 years, honestly, a lot of these parcels are outside our urban growth boundary, and I thought about this as I'm sitting here. I should probably have given you an idea of how much property is actually outside the urban growth boundary that will, after 9 years, will never be annexable. 9 years is a long time. It's short, but maybe long, and the state law could change in the next 9 years. But we wanted to bring this before you and ask for your recommendation or your approval to change these policies and procedures to set those expectations for outside the city sewer parcels that have sewer or sewer close by, that would no longer be really accessible by written agreement unless they fall within the two categories I defined prior to. So I'm available for questions.
Good presentation, Mr. Gore.
Thank you very much.
There's no other questions or comments. I move we approve the recommendation of the...
Second.
Motion second. Ms. Wright?
Mr. Shacklet?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Thank you. Ms. Wright, thank you, Mr. Gore. Ms. Wright, see, we have a couple of beer permits.
Do you want to do the appointments first?
We can do that. Sorry about that. We have several appointments to reappoint people to the Airport Commission: Gail Zlotsky, Steve Waldron, Clay Cook, and John Polk. And then also to the Evergreen Cemetery Board, reappoint Chuck Clark, Billy Miller, Laws McCullough, and Myers Parson.
Move to approve the recommendations of the mayor.
Second.
Motion and a second. Ms. Wright?
Mr. Shacklet?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. We'll move into payment of statements. Any bills?
How about I do beer permits
Now
next?
the beer.
I was just doing that to be mean.
Keeping me on my toes.
Yes, all right, we'll move to beer permits.
We have a special event application for the Discovery Center for an event on June the 3rd. And we have a new owner of a restaurant at 451 North Thompson Lane, Suite G. The special event has met our requirements for permission for you to issue that permit, but the restaurant is still lacking their building codes inspections. Otherwise, they meet our requirements, and we offer a recommendation to approve that once they meet the building codes inspections.
I'm not about the debate.
Something different next.
Are we on the, where are we?
Have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I don't know what.
Ms. Wright?
Mr. Shacklet?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. We'll move to payment of statements.
We don't have any tonight.
Any other business from staff for City Council? I've got one item. We have a request from AD Pie to be able to hang a banner on Main Street March 11th through the 21st for their AD Pie or Alpha Delta Pi Athlon. It's a sprint triathlon. And they had gotten their application in a little late. Ms. Machota was working with them.
Sounds like it's raising money for some really good causes. Move for approval.
Second.
Motion second. Ms. Wright?
Mr. Shacklet?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Any other business?
Mr. Mayor, I have one other thing I wanted to just bring back onto the table and hopefully task staff to move forward. Mr. Lyon, we had talked about the need for us to have some type of workshop, retreat, whatever you want to say, a session that we kind of go away and consider some of the broader issues. There's so many things that I think we need to deal with in the next few months, and to have some time where we're able to not be constrained by the evening or by a complicated agenda. I would like for us to task Mr. Lyons to come up with a place, a time, maybe after our preliminary budget is put together, so that we can have that as a part of this discussion, dealing with some of those issues that are before us, and so that we can provide some additional direction and priority setting for the staff as they move forward. I think it would be healthy for us to do it, and it's been sitting there and we just haven't moved forward. So I would like by the next meeting or two to have a recommendation as to where we could go, when we could go, and what we intend to accomplish in this, or at least address during this.
I like it.
And I couldn't agree with Mr. Shacklet more. I'm not concerned about a mediator or anything. We just need to get together and discuss some of the big, long-range issues that we have for the future of the city. And so I think this is relatively simple to get put together, and fairly quickly we ought to be able to get together and have these conversations.
I like it.
Be glad to.
We need a motion for that?
I think I know what to do.
All right. You saw all of us shake our heads, so. All right, great suggestion, Mr. Shacklett.
Okay.
And I don't know if anyone knows this yet, but Mr. Shacklett and I are coaching against each other for baseball this year, so I will take my losses from Mr. Shacklett. and move on.
Don't speak too early.
Yeah. All right.
He drafted well.
That's right. We'll stand adjourned.
Isn't it great, five politicians?